going on, folks? Welcome back to another episode of not pandemics in world history, but in relation to history, about news events happening in the globe at this current time in current affairs. I mean, the whole world's pretty much in a COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown. The entire rebellion and revolts that broke out through the United States. But I don't want to really get too much into a few things right now. There's a lot of things going on in the world that this year, 2020, has been like 2020 vision when it comes to history, because there's a lot of history the last 5 months. I would basically put it this way: a lot of loose ends are tied up. New ones are forming, and we're in the midst of not getting to the end of some things. Now, one thing I want to talk about, well, two things, is basically what's going on in the States, and with George Floyd as the major. That name is cemented, and that man is cemented in history. And in the course of, he's pretty much the figurehead of this massive movement of Black Lives Matter. Now, it's not Black Lives Matter. Every life matters. Okay? This is where it becomes, they put it so racial between white and black, right? And pinning whites against blacks, it's not that. It's pretty much innocent people, honest, innocent people, righteous people, standing up for the right reasons, for the correct reasons, against narrow-minded, corrupt individuals within one institution, law enforcement, to serve and protect society and fellow citizens. Okay? This whole thing, this kind of behavior, this social consciousness really shows itself within the United States at this point in time. It took a few little dominoes, a few little events, and boom! And Minneapolis was pretty much the epicenter of this massive movement. Even it's going across the globe, and even in our own country. There's protests and marches all across, even back in my home province in Moncton. You heard about the racial slurs that guy. Whew! That was pretty potent. Okay? And a woman from St. John today, she's a correspondent at CBC, and she's a CBC host. And I was fairly impressed, because it's kind of one of these funny things in life I was going to talk about. It's like the KKK and the Maritimes in New Brunswick history in the 1920s. And it showed the picture across the covered bridge in Heartland. And things like that. Well, I don't believe it was in Heartland, that covered bridge. But that movement was in New Brunswick's history. And I love that she posted that. And hopefully it gets people interested in more about their provincial history and how New Brunswick has a really rich history. And you're going to be in for some surprises. And I love New Brunswick history and East Coast history, because it's pretty much, if I had majored in Canadian history, that would be my specialty, is the East Coast. Eastern half of Canada, I would say. Yeah. East Coast lifestyle. But, which is pretty interesting, and I tip my hat and acknowledge the fact that she have done that, and actually posted that. Which is really good. It gives you a sense and idea of what racism, and that really sponsored the event that happened in Moncton. That was the repercussions of such thing that, we gotta put this out. You think racism doesn't exist in New Brunswick? Still there, buddy. Still there. But it's not the fact of what happened in the States, it's the fact that there's a lot of white and black supremacy. And this whole movement started out Black Lives Matter. And naturally, throughout history, and movements always start to, it takes a life of its own and starts to evolve. Okay? It's like that telephone game You start out you tell this guy, okay, he went to the store with his dog to buy a bag of chips. And the time it gets to that end of that telephone wire, throughout the class, it could be like he fucked the dog and he went and robbed the store and got himself some bag of chips and got caught by the cops. Okay? It picks up momentum. People naturally add things because they forget. We want to fill the void. It's like looking in the clouds. We see a face. Pattern recognition. No, not really. It's just a cloud. We want to fill that void. Even when it comes to the simplest things. Same things happen in the States right now. A lot of people are starting to enter into this new movement, taking and tagging along and hitching a ride with this movement to get their own ethnical and personal interests acknowledged and out there. Okay, we've seen this in Canada, where Black Lives Matter, and all of a sudden the natives are born on this. They're tagging along. They're hitching onto this wagon. And Native Lives Matter, and okay, this is a prime example within our own country. And the other thing I like to see is basically how things are starting to, a lot of these protesters are just caught up against authority. All right, even whites, blacks, it doesn't matter. We see a lot of good things in this. We see like revolutionary, or in times of revolution, a lot of elements of it. Okay, where in some cases the cops and the protesters are coming together. They realize like we are one. We just had a few bad apples in the barrel. Okay, we're just trying to get rid of those bad apples out of law enforcement. We don't gonna have to go AWOL when the society goes, let's go torch buildings, destroy, loot, pillage, just mass out anarchy and chaos. Just no point of it. It's basically this metaphor or analogy. One stone starts falling from the top. By the end it gets to the bottom, it's a full-blown landslide or mudslide. Okay? That rock keeps going down, starts taking more rocks, starts to get in motion, and eventually there's so many rocks, people are just caught up into it. Right? They don't know why they're caught up into it. They're just caught up into it. And the original cause gets diluted when it gets to the bottom of the hill. And this is what I'm going to see what's going to happen in the States. We've already seen it starting to happen in Canada. Just like that, the Aboriginals or the natives got on board. Okay? Knew that was going to happen. Every chance they get, they'll get on a hitch or a ride with something and go along with it. It always happens in Canadian history. Now, one thing that surprised me the most is Tim Hortons is the greatest thing on the planet. But one thing that I really noticed, and this is what historians really look at and study when we study history, is that social consciousness. Another example in this country of a social consciousness movement is basically anti-provincial discrimination. Okay, right now. Remember the episode with BC? The guy goes down with an Alberta license plate. The good Canadian manner. I'm going to write myself an angry letter. And I'm going to post it right on his car. I'm going to let him know how I feel and how wrong what I think he's doing. And that's what happens. Pretty much told him because of COVID-19, go back to your own province. Don't bring it here. Stop with the uncentral travel. And that's starting to happen a lot. And I'm also seeing it back in my home province of New Brunswick. Okay? And I find it really fascinating, too, because it's starting to come against Quebec. Because of this whole Campbellton cluster infection that's happening. Because of the doctor. I'm not going to get into on that. But, which kind of screwed up the whole everything. Right? Now, so what I would presume... Oh no, we lost lights. Okay, we got lights back. Now, way too many lights right now. But that's pretty much how that goes. Now, so basically, in an overall stance of events, this kind of things are unfolding. And pretty greatly. Okay? So, got more light. I like that. But it should go back to 1. Now, let's say, so, woohoo. Anyway, gotta love that. Shit happens all the time, right? Gotta roll with it. And a lot of these things like that is like lights on. A lot of things are starting to be realized, right? And this is things, movements within society that everybody agrees upon. And this is pretty much one of the reactions of a lockdown, okay? I like to get into what a historian looks at when I want to see it in a lockdown in a time of a pandemic, how it affects the human psyche, and pretty much everything along those lines. So, but we'll be doing that eventually after we do a bunch of pandemics throughout world history. Then we'll look at it. Which I gotta work on those. I don't know why. But anyways, the other major thing I really want to look at, and I don't know if anybody knows, should know it, is about the tensions between China, okay? After this COVID-19. This is one of the economic failures, okay? This is one of the problems with the pandemic lockdown. It led to economic failure and recession, and towards the world of depression, okay? The idea that China is pretty much, you see the post out there, you got the balls to say not made in China. Now, and a lot of countries as well is pretty much going against the fact of, China should actually take responsibility for this COVID-19 pandemic. They could have stopped it. And for that, it shut the world down. Many lives have been disrupted. Okay? And other things in lockdowns have happened. Abuses have went up. Domestic, child, spousal. Suicide rates have been going up on a massive scale. Suicide, you can look at that. We're a social animal. Some people just shot themselves or killed themselves because they couldn't socialize. They couldn't stand the fact that they could be in there with their own thoughts. It's true. Now, massive unemployment. Divorce rates are going way up. So this is one of results and repercussions of lockdown. But it also tells you what is really going on in society. We keep them away, then all of a sudden we come back and we reveal a problem when we put them together. But we're not going to get into that. Now, the whole thing with China is basically the world is pretty much its eyes on China. And China's the one that's caused this. They locked down. They shut the world down. Now, China knows that they're pretty much on the verge of becoming a superpower. They want to become a superpower. They pretty much got the West and most of the world by the balls economically and pretty much in a consumer world of buying cheap goods. Don't tell me you don't like to buy cheap goods, because I'll tell you you're a lying cocksucker. Now, because of China, this is why we have this. Now, so, in the last 5 months or so, there's been a lot of verba in China. Now, you could say they got the COVID-19 under pretty much mostly under control. A lot of you skeptators and liberals would say, go jump right to the gun and say, no, they don't. It's probably right out of control. We don't even know about it because it's a communist government. Partially true. Okay? But no country throughout history wants a pandemic ravaging their country, especially what China's doing right now. First thing we're going to discuss is basically what's going on between China and India. And the last time they ever had a major war, and actually was classified as a war, peace treaties were signed, things like this, was in 1962. They actually had a massive conflict at this point over territorial dispute, okay, between territories between these two nations. And right now, way high up in the Himalayas, you got two massive armies like staring each other down across the border like it's a Wild West showdown. We're going to have a shoot-off. Right? Now we just got to wait till that clock strikes 12. and who's going to fire first. Who's going to go down first. Okay? But I would pretty much estimate the fact that a lot of people, it's over a territorial dispute between these two countries. If the war did break out, it would be just like in this 1962. It'd be just between these two countries. And that, right off the hop, is a given. Okay? And that's right off the hop a given. So, either or, I'll have to keep this light going, just because. It's going to have a little wake-up call during this thing, right? Lights on, wake up. But we're going to actually look at that as well, so we're going to get into it as it goes, right? So, but anyways, so this pretty much happened, okay? Now, China's in a pretty particular, when the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party actually stands to prepare for war in the People's Committee, which is pretty much the government of China, okay? Now, into the People's Republic of China. So, you have to say, when he prepared for war, it meant India. But I don't think he also meant India, if you read his speech. He's also preparing for economic war, too. And this is going to be interesting enough. Okay? Very interesting enough. Now, so these two armies are poised against each other, and it's funny, they're literally throwing sticks and rocks at each other. No joke, look up these articles, it's fucking hilarious, okay? I mean, now, the sense of, if war did ever break out, I'm going to basically say this, if it does break out, which I don't think it is, but if it does, it's only going to be a territorial dispute, okay? And one thing about territorial disputes, especially after 1945, if you ever actually noticed in most wars ever since then, okay, any territorial disputes, pretty much those two countries just fight it out. Not many other people get involved. Okay? I'll give you a historical lesson on this. Quick one. Okay? Remember the war between Iran and Iraq in the 80s? That went on for 8-9 years, haven't it? And that, Saddam Hussein, because Iraq actually was over a territorial dispute, won in the southern part of Iraq that bordered into Iran. Iran owned it. That war was one of the major causes and one of the major goals that Saddam wanted to take. Okay? There's a lot more history to that, but we're just focusing on that. Another territorial conflict. Just the two countries going at her. Okay? There's quite a few in Africa at this time, but anyways. A big one involves a big power. Okay? Britain and Argentina. Okay? 1982. I think it was the Falkland Wars. Don't quote me on that. Now, right now. But, so, that war broke out between the two countries over the Falkland Islands and the occupation. And that was a war where soldiers fought for soldiers between those two countries. Only those two involved. More recent example. Russia invaded Georgia. Same thing. Ossetia is split. North and south. North in Russia, south in Georgia. Ethnical Russians, a lot of ethnical Russians live in South Ossetia. They invaded the country. They could have took it over. Nobody was going to say anything. But if they took it over, that would be in jeopardy with the charter of NATO, right? Right to self-determination, a nation's right to self-determination, defend itself, and that would be, cause a war. Probably a major war. But at the time, it was over a territorial dispute as well. Just the two countries go at her, but Russia pulled back. Now, some wars, like in the Bosnian War, was basically over ethnics, but it also was over territory in a sense. But when it got to the point where it was ethnic, couldn't do it because it was in Europe's backyard. And plus, there was a lot of ethnic cleansing happening, and that was for sure. So NATO had to get involved in that in the United Nations. Now, the other thing, too, so that's pretty much some examples. in the last little bit, and there's more, okay, of how territorial, if this is over territorial or territorial dispute, it will be only between the two countries, okay? Now, the other thing that really concerns me is China's move on Hong Kong. Now, you have to remember Hong Kong was originally what? For a long time. A British colony. Keep this in mind. They were originally a British colony. And if I remember surgically correctly as a historian, July the 1st and June the 30th, and July the 3rd, 1st, 1997, Britain finally gave up Hong Kong. Okay? Gave up the entire peninsula of Hong Kong. Now, they had it, they gained it after the first opium war. Okay, the Opium Wars. After the first one, okay? And that pretty much ended in 1842, okay? Now, after the second Opium War, okay, 1898. Now, the thing was, Britain signed a 99-year lease to this land. A 100-year lease. They owned it. And they did wonders to Hong Kong and built Hong Kong the way it is today. You have to owe it to the Brits. And that's why pretty much Boris Johnson right now, because of Wexit, you got to remember, Britain right now, it's its own independent country, not part of a union. It's got to make its own new political alliances, economic trades, and agreements. And Hong Kong always had it in their hearts. An Asian gem. It wasn't always India, in a sense. But it becomes the new India to Britain ever since then. And to gain an ally to Hong Kong, especially by issuing an extension of visas and things of this nature to 30 to 60,000 people from Hong Kong to come and to escape China's takeover of Hong Kong, okay? And to really subdiment totalitarian rule and law. Draconian law, sound familiar? Okay? Where that comes from. So, basically, this is what I find really fascinating. This is starting to unfold. And China's really getting a lot of discrimination, a lot of prejudice, and a lot of fault towards them over the COVID-19 outbreak. China's really doing really bad. Okay, if they lose a lot of these things, you gotta remember you got 1 billion people in the world, over 1 billion people in the world, living there. This is going to be hard to obtain. And what the West wants to really eventually see do is that the people of China would eventually naturally rise up and encourage what happens in Hong Kong, but on a like a national scale within China, to overthrow the communist regime and establish a Western-style democracy and capitalist economy. That's what the West wants, and most of the world does. Okay. Now, China has been flexing its military power a lot lately, especially in the last decade. Okay, they've been buying up a lot of resources around the world, especially in Africa and in their own country, Canada. All right, and a lot of the states, and even they can protect their assets. The idea that the military can come over, possibly. Okay. Now, Canada's dumb, and we got a dumbass prime minister who wouldn't see it. But, okay, they can protect their assets. They can protect their companies and their resource-based. Especially if they ever go to war, that would be something they would need to do. They want to make sure, yeah, you're going to stay on our side, you're going to give us these resources. Okay? Because you need these natural resources, no matter what they are, to fuel your war machine, if it ever got to that point. but they also are trying to build a massive military, right? Their actions in South China Sea and against the Philippines, their actions against Taiwan. Okay, a lot of this is starting to unfold. It seems after hundreds of years of European imperialism and oppression, they're starting to finally want to become a superpower. It's not like they haven't learned from their successors that owned them before. Okay? Don't ever underestimate anything. Okay? It's better to overestimate in many cases than underestimate. Now, just sum up all the world events that are happening, okay? And I'm really concerned about what's going on with China and India and how China's getting treated in this whole massive in the Western world. We don't want China made. China should be at fault for this. And right now, America's pretty much preoccupied with the massive COVID-19 outbreak down there. Over 1 million cases and growing daily. Over 100,000 deaths. This is rampant throughout the country. And now these protests between races, between white and black, which we both know and logically is stupid. Okay? But I might do a little episode on just talking about the protest and how a historian's looking at it right now, in a historian view. But right now, a lot in the world is looking pretty good. All right. So, lights out. We're almost done on that one. So, until next time. I think in the next day or two, I'm actually going to do the next pandemic world history. Then I'm going to keep going for at least a little bit. Next one we're going to do is Black Death. We're going to look at the positive and negative effects, the consequences, the repercussions, and pretty much what kind of domino effect does it set off. And Black Death, the bionic plague. Okay. And then we're going to do a lot more others. Probably ones that you don't even really know of. That were actually a worldwide pandemic. Like one of them I will be eventually talking about is, you ever hear of the Hong Kong flu? Okay. Now if you're an older person, you should have. But, until next time, we're going to wrap this up, go from there. There's still a lot to cover. There's probably some loose ends that I didn't do this, but I just do this on a whim. So, a thing like this. So, and I said, yeah, I might as well. You know, what do you guys think? What's your commentary on anything that's going on in the States, races, like any questions? I prefer people to ask questions. Because if you ask questions, that means you have a thirst for knowledge. You want to know. And you want to get an answer. Nothing wrong with that. If you don't ask questions, you get nothing. Simple. But keep unfolding, because what I think is going to happen in this country is going to escalate more. This whole whites versus black. In our country, the natives are going to take up into this too. They're going to hop on that bandwagon and go down that hill until the bottom of that mudslide. And we'll see what kind of fucking damage it done and how much it's going to take to clean up. Is it going to set back racial relations for another 100 years? Is it going to set back relationships between our law enforcement that we pay taxes to protect us and serve going to backfire on us? A lot of questions should be asking about this and what's going to happen in the States. Especially during the time pandemic. This is one thing of a social conscience always happens during a pandemic event. And this is great to see in modern times. It has a lot of different things, but it has a lot of similarities even from the ones from the past. So, but either or, take care until then. Comment, whatever. You usually don't, so I'm not worried about it. But if you watch it, see if you watch it to the end. I like to say things throughout the thing that, I know a few people that are fucking homos. Let's see if you watched it.